Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, Ven Gache. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, no problem.
Here we go. Let's see. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the review sessions. Yes, I can hear you clearly. Oh, we have said. Oh, can you turn this off? Because this is, I think, the echoing. Can you get me your Priscilla? Can you get me earphones? I have the echo here. Sorry, Ven Gache. It's the first time that I work on this computer and try to live stream, but we have an echo here. I'm not sure where the echo comes from. You don't hear the echo? You don't hear it?
Maybe I can hear. It's not very strong. It's not much of a problem.
Maybe we just go ahead. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. I ignore the echo. Thank you so much, Venerable Gache, for leading these review sessions on His Holiness teachings, which happens this morning, 8 o'clock Indian time. And we are so pleased to have you here. Now I'm hearing myself again, so maybe I stop talking and give the microphone to Venerable Gache. I'm so very sorry. You're trying to solve this.
Well, yes, thank you everybody for coming, and I hope this works. I suppose this is a new approach for Tushita, doing these online courses, but it's a lot easier for me. We're quite busy here in the monastery, and so I'm very happy to contribute to Tushita, but it's also difficult to always be traveling, especially most of you are probably not in Ladakh right now, so we wouldn't be receiving these teachings anyway if we didn't have the connection. As was probably clear on the website, the plan is that for today and tomorrow, I will just review what His Holiness said during the teachings in the morning. And then on Saturday and Sunday, we will go directly through the text, the 9th chapter of Shantideva's text, which, as you know, if you saw the teaching this morning, it's only this didn't actually begin that chapter this morning. So he'll probably go through it fairly quickly tomorrow, meaning it'll be good that we have some more time on the weekend to go through it 2 sessions a day. So as I usually like to start just to sit quietly for a couple of minutes so we can all be fully present here. And maybe people might trickle in as well during that time. So just for a couple of minutes we can sit together. Okay, so we have about an hour and a half being here at Sarah. Of course, we have our schedule to follow, so I will have to go to a puja at 6, so until 5:30 Indian time, I can continue here. So I will hopefully spend about an hour, perhaps going over what His Holiness said from my notes, and then after that we can have some question and answer if people have questions. His Holiness actually said quite a lot today, as many of you know who saw the teaching. Well, even though there was the translation for about half the time, he still managed to say quite a lot. So I've got about 4.5 pages of notes. Let's see, I'll maybe go through the main points. So of course, His Holiness started by mentioning how important it is to use reasoning. This is what he emphasized again and again. That it opens the wisdom eye. He said the path of the Buddha is the path of analysis and not just because Buddha said so, we believe it, like might be the case in other religions. So it's very good if students can do that. And we're following an Nalanda tradition, and he was congratulating the children who were debating, saying that's a really good practice, they should continue. And he was also mentioning that in Western countries, that this is what's considered the most important approach, is using reasoning. It's not going to help to tell everyone you have to believe what the Buddha said. We can only convince people through reasoning and encourage them to use their own reasoning faculties. He was saying for us being Tibetans and Himalayan region, that they have the habit or the custom from their parents and from their ancestors of practicing Buddhism, but this is not the case for Westerners. So he says, I love to meet scientists since they like to investigate and not just and go through faith. So this really is compatible, he was saying, with the Buddhism, and maybe not again with some other religions. And he was emphasizing Shantarakshita, so many of you might know, the great scholar from the 8th century who came to Tibet, and how much he considered the importance of the pramana, the text on epistemology and reasoning. So some of you might know that the first major text on reasoning in Buddhism was by Dignaga, the compendium of valid cognition. And then there was a commentary on this by Dharmakirti, the commentary on valid cognition. And then maybe some of you don't know, there's actually also a commentary on that by Shantarakshita called the suchness of valid cognition, and the Bhikkhu. So that actually, I believe it might be translated into English. I meant to check, and I forgot to check, but I will check after session. I will let you know. Probably tomorrow, remind me if I forget. But that's a text that was quite important in the early days in Tibet. Nowadays, we don't study it in the monastery, but it's part of the Ladakh program. So the monks who enter the Ladakh class do actually study that. In the early days in Tibet, Shantarakshita was one of the most important teachers. But nowadays, most study of Madhyamaka is based on Chandrakirti, his interpretation of Nagarjuna. But in the early years, there was more emphasis on Shantarakshita. But this is actually not a Madhyamaka text. This is a text on valid cognition. But in any case, when Shantarakshita came to Tibet, it was the first great scholar to come to Tibet and establish a monastery there. Then he encouraged this use of reasoning. And again, His Holiness said that's very good that the children debate, and by extension, anybody who wants to practice, it's very good if it's possible to learn to debate. But then His Holiness was mentioning in the text by Chandrakirti, the engaging in the middle way or entering the middle way, introduction to the middle way, however we want to translate it, Madhyamaka. So in the second verse of this text, Chandrakirti talks about great compassion. So His Holiness was saying that even though this entire text is the text of reasoning, this is a 10-chapter text, but the 6th chapter takes up about 2/3 or 3/4 of the text, and that's all about emptiness. But the text starts with homage to compassion, and Chandrakirti says because everything comes from compassion. All of the Buddhist teachings and all of the realizations, they all originate in compassion, including the realization of emptiness, has to be based on compassion. This is something actually we debate for about 2 months in the monastery. When we start Madhyamaka, before we actually start the studying of emptiness, is talking about what is meant by this verse. So if I'm going to try to do the screen share here. Oh, so the host need to enable screen sharing. Is that possible? So we can all see it. Well, in any case, I'll wait for that. But Chandrakirti, he says, so because the sewa, or affection, which is synonymous with compassion here, is the seed of the great crop of victors, meaning Buddhas. So it's the very beginning. So this goes to 3 stages. That at the very beginning, compassion is important. The reason being that if one doesn't have great compassion, then one won't give rise to the wish to attain enlightenment for others, the bodhicitta, and also won't give rise to the realization of emptiness. What's understood here is that to really realize emptiness requires an enormous amount of effort, and so that motivating force has to come from something very strong. Somebody who's just intellectually interested won't really have the motivation to go through the hardship of having deep meditative realization. It's only somebody who really has great compassion that will be able to do that, or put the time and effort into doing that, and have also generate the amount of merit that would be required to do that. And then so Gyanche Gawelodo Punso de Sabontani Pella Chujo Yunrindu. So when that expands, when that seed then expands or starts to ripen and starts to sprout, then compassion is like the water that nurtures the seed. So this is said in the middle, that when you're already on the path and practicing, if one loses compassion, then one won't continue developing. So in the middle, great compassion is important. So it's like when ripening, when what we're trying to achieve ripens, we start having realizations and qualities. Then at that point, if there's no compassion, then one won't teach others. So some of you might know there's the saying, when the Buddha first achieved enlightenment, he said, he explains this verse that it's said to be for the manifesting for the benefit of others. So this very profound Dharma that I have realized, Dharma here doesn't mean like the Dharma of the teachings, it means this thing that I have realized, emptiness, is extremely profound and subtle and difficult to realize. This nectar light phenomena, we called it. Sula Dentando Famigirwe. So no matter to whom I teach it, they won't understand. Mima Naksuneparcha. So he says, I won't teach, I'm going to abide in force. So this would be what happens if great compassion is not fully present, that one would just think, what's the point of trying to teach anybody? They won't understand. But if somebody has a great motivating force, then they'll go through whatever it takes to communicate that realization. So at the end, so the beginning, middle, and end, that great compassion is very important. So His Holiness was counterbalancing what he's saying about reasoning, that yes, reasoning is central, but it's not just an intellectual understanding. It has to be coupled with great compassion. And His Holiness was saying this is common to all of religions, of course, that in all religions, the main advice is to have compassion, no matter how that is understood, whether it's in terms of beings being created by God and therefore worthy of compassion, or in Buddhism, there's other reasonings, mainly twofold. One, that we've had connections with all beings since the beginning of this lifetimes, and secondly, that simply that reasoning dictates so that it doesn't make any sense to consider oneself the most important. Neither is there any reason for doing so, and secondly, it actually is harmful if we look at the effects of it, as His Holiness talked about later. It doesn't actually bring happiness. So His Holiness was saying of the 4 kinds of birth, if you might know in Buddhism, it's understood there's 4 ways a being can be born. So one is out of a womb and one is out of an egg. These would both be something that we'd all accept, but then the other 2 are a miraculous birth, so as a god or as a ghost, other non-corporeal beings. Or Buddhism talks about birth from heat and moisture. This one I'm not sure of. I think maybe they just didn't see the very small eggs, because they talked about like mosquitoes being born out of the water. But I'm not sure. It's not really something very clear. But in any case, His Holiness was saying that forget about the other 2. The main ones are the womb and the egg. We see that they both have mother, and life starts with the compassion of the mother. And so that is the essence of the life. That's what gives meaning to life. That is, somebody who rejects compassion is rejecting what gave birth to them. And so they're not fulfilling the purpose of the human life. And secondly, that he pointed out that human life depends on society. As His Holiness often quotes, that humans are social animals. And so it's not enough just to work for one's own happiness. It doesn't make any sense. We're so dependent on society. So if we want a kind, happy life, we have to think that way. And if we only think of ourselves, then we won't actually be happy. So then he quoted a verse. I don't know where this is from, but he said, Sampa sanna saranlam yang sang, which would mean if your thought is kind, if you have a good kind intention, then the ground and path will also be good. The word sang in Tibetan, it doesn't have this meaning in English, but it can mean both kind and good. So the point is that if you have a good mind, then also the ground, like the environment you're in, will also be good, and the path that you try to follow will be good. Sambangena sanhalam yang yen. So if you have a wicked mind, then the path and ground will also, again, wicked doesn't work in English, but if they're bad. With a bad mind, then the ground and path will also be bad. Tamshe zangpa dalaralepe. So everything depends upon kindness. And there's probably a 4th line to that verse. I don't know if he said it. Either he said it or I didn't hear it. But I didn't write down the 4th line. But I think we get the point. So His Holiness was saying every day it's good to think about emptiness and bodhicitta. It makes the mind relax. And he says if we do a sedrup, which means like a long life practice. So for example, he's saying like the practice of amitayas, but we're full of pride and anger and jealousy, then there's not really much benefit. And he said having a wish to benefit others is actually the best kind of sedrup. So really, if you want to extend your life, the best way is to have compassion. And on top of that, if you can do a sedrup practice, why not? But it's not going to work to try to do the sedrup practice if your mind is full of delusion and hatred. So he said we all abide in society and we should treat others well. So he's saying, he personally, His Holiness, as I count bodhicitta practice as very important, especially meditation on love for those who harm you. He says, saying there's trouble in Tibet, but he only has the wish to benefit the Chinese leaders who have opposed him. And so the result, he says, is I'm happy. whether it's effective or not in winning freedom for Tibet, he's happy, right? And ideally, it would also be the best manner of winning freedom, but in many cases, in the short run, oneself is happy as a result. So he says, if you're kind to your friends, you have a happy life. If you have pride and jealousy, then you will never be happy. So be affectionate and friendly. He's saying this quite over and over again. And he was saying the root of world peace is kindness. That if everybody was full of fear and suspicion of others, then we might spend lots and lots of money trying to find world peace, but there's never going to be a resolution. But if everybody has happiness and kindness for each other, then that will naturally come. So he said, if you think of the person to your left and to your right, they want to harm you, then it will just start conflict, and that conflict will never end. And then His Holiness, you saw him eating the, I guess, apricot or peach. Nari Kambu is saying, but I think he's saying it when he was young in Norbalinka, then he ate these. He enjoyed picking them, and now he's 87, but he still likes to eat them. So Nari is in Western Tibet, you might know. And then so Ladakh would be, I wonder, maybe even before modern boundaries were drawn, Ladakh might have even been considered part of Nari. But nowadays, Nari is the western province of Tibet. For example, we have Nari Kangzin at Sara, the house group from Nari. Most of them are from Ladakh, so there is definitely a connection there. So His Holiness again was saying that kindness is the root of happiness, and all religions agree on this. But Buddhism, especially the Nalanda tradition, gives very clear reasons why that's the case. It talks about the benefits of practicing happiness without any reference point to a creator God or any kind of religious idea. It's simply based on direct observation and the disadvantages of anger. So, of course, any of you who have read this text, Shantideva's text, the 6th chapter, is all about this. There's very few verses in the 6th chapter that require any kind of Buddhist worldview. Most of them are completely compatible with any worldview, as long as we just look at our experience and look at the effects that anger have. As I often have felt, this 6th chapter of Shantideva's text certainly deserves to be considered one of the great classics of world literature, not just as a religious text, but it is quite an extraordinary piece of literature, of art. And clearly Shantideva had both considerable knowledge of Buddhism, but also considerable writing skills. Of course, I haven't read it in Sanskrit, but in Tibetan also that comes out quite clearly. So then His Holiness talked about exchanging self and others. And then he used a term actually I'd never heard. He said nangsak. Nangsak, so maybe nangsak probably means this. Nangsak in Tibetan means like sort of, it can mean informal or sort of among close friends. So like if I say to you, we're all nangsak here, so I can just talk to you straight. We don't have to be formal, and I can talk about what I really feel. And then yen probably means close relatives. So yeah, I think he was. I'm not sure exactly how that relates to the Dakshin Yamje, which is the exchanging self and others, but probably the idea is to try to see others as close to oneself, have a sense of closeness with others. This is the point. Often people ask about this issue of the seeing all beings as your mother, and some people have had a difficult time with that. But really, the point is, it's not a matter, if you have a difficult relationship with your mother, or it's hard to imagine that all beings have been your mother. Really, the point is that all beings, there's a sense of closeness with all others. So whoever you feel close to, the point is to extend that to others, and not just have that sense of closeness only with the people that you were born into their family, or you happen by circumstance to be physically close to them, or have some kind of lot of relation with them, but extend that to everybody else, which is something that can be done through meditation. This is something we have to experiment with and see if that's possible. So His Holiness was saying that Ladakh is very close to Tibet. So geographically, I assume he means, but also culturally. So if Ladakhis practice kindness, then that will also benefit Tibet. If they're concerned about the situation in Tibet, that will probably spill over by everyone practicing kindness. So His Holiness was saying, he will lay down he laid down his life for the Tibetan cause, but not by fighting, by compassion and courage together. And His Holiness has said this many times recently that he feels China is changing a lot and things might shift. So that's something for those of us at the monastery here, with some sort of not something we think about day to day, but of course we're here in a refugee camp. So who knows when all of a sudden we would pack up and leave. That would be quite disruptive for those of us who've come here and have worked really hard to get visas. But that's probably a very minor thing when we think about the suffering of the Tibetan people and how wonderful it would be if they could have their country back, or at least have the freedom to practice Buddhism again in their country. So yeah, maybe let's see. I could mention also one of my teachers, Jokini Rinpoche. Many of you might know him. A few years ago, he was saying that he asked, please quote me on this. He said, please write down that I said this and remember that I said this. That he thinks that the young people in China are disillusioned with the communist regime and are not interested in continuing with the current regime, and actually have a lot of interest in Buddhism. So because of course Buddhism being the traditional religion of China, or one of three traditional religions, but very strong in China, and being suppressed for quite some time. So he feels that a lot of the young people will actually start to see Tibet as something really valuable that's related to China, and thereby that it could be a complete shift, that rather than China being the oppressor of Tibet, that China will be the protector of Tibet, as it has been in the past. So let's see what happens, but yeah, it's hard to say. I don't know a lot. I don't know if anybody really knows very well what's happening all over China, because the information is not always so clear. But it's certainly a possibility. It seems to me more likely than any other option, because the government is not in any position for anybody to challenge them at the moment, except for some kind of internal dissent in people in the country not having, no longer supporting what they're doing. And His Holiness was just saying that there's no longer, that communism has really declined, even though nominally China is a communist country. It doesn't function as so. He's saying from Moscow through all the other former communist countries, democracy is really the way the world is going, and that fits in, because the root of democracy is kindness. Of course, I have heard His Holiness say that if we really look at communism, that the root of it, in some sense, is compassion, because it was based on a sense of looking at the oppressed. So that's but I think also, I'm not a political scientist, but I'm looking at a lot of the countries that have called themselves communist. I wonder how much that really fits in with the original ideals of communism. But in any case, yeah, it definitely. As His Holiness has said, it seems that democracy is becoming the established norm in many places, and hopefully that will continue. And altruism, he said also. Kindness and altruism are the root of democracy. So he's saying we have 7 billion people, and if we're kind to each other, then we can work together, and there's a chance for having peace together. So His Holiness was just saying, he said he's called the head of the Tibetan people, but he has faith also in the Tibetan people. And he was saying this includes from Ladakh to Mun, many of you might know. Mun is in southeast, originally called Southeast Tibet, but now it's part of India. It's been part of India for since Indian independence. Probably was part of the British India as well. So Arunachal Pradesh is what Mun is. So rather fortunately for them, they became part of India and weren't part of China. So that's one of the places where the traditional Buddhist culture is still practiced freely. So if we look at Ladakh to Tibet, and then Bhutan, Mon, and the northeast regions of Nepal, and Sikkim, which is also part of India. Culturally, those are all part of Tibetan culture, and to some extent, Mongolia. It's very strongly influenced by Tibet, but it's a little more independent in the culture. As we see here in the monastery, we have a lot of monks from Ladakh and Mun who are blend in pretty well with the Tibetans. They're a little different culturally, but their language. Actually, this morning it was interesting. You may have heard there was a Ladakhi translator translating from His Holiness. I could understand most of what he said, so I wonder if it was necessary to translate it. It was sort of as though one, like if I'm speaking in American English and then somebody translates it into Scottish English. But in any case, so most of these countries, they're all based on Tibetan script, and Tibetan, the language is very similar, whereas Mongolia is a different language, and we have the Mongolian monks here. There are quite a lot of them, but they're quite different culturally, and sort of like us as foreigners. Foreigners is a blanket term for anybody who's not Tibetan and a Mongolian, so includes a lot of people, but the Mongolians are quite a different class. So if he's talking about the Ladakh to Mun, this is the Tibetan sphere, and he feels that he has faith in them he said many times to preserve the teachings of the Buddha, and because in Tibet right now it's not possible, but there are certainly a lot of Himalayan monks. Himalayan meaning, so yeah, the non-Tibetan Tibetan rituals, mainly Mun and Ladakh. Some Bhutan, but most of the Bhutanese are Kagi. So we get some Bhutanese monks coming here to Sera to study for 3 years. That's the kind of the standard thing. They learn how to debate, and they go back to the Kagi monastery. We had about 10 in our class, and they all left after 3 years. But yeah, it's still culturally part of Tibet. I don't know as many of them because we don't have so much of that at Sera. So His Holiness was then saying, I don't say everyone has to be Buddhist. I only say everyone has to be kind. Actually, I was just reading today. Also, it was interesting to see the 5th Dalai Lama said something very similar. So sometimes it's been pointed out that under the 5th Dalai Lama, there was some religious oppression. Because in 1642, the 5th Dalai Lama became the first Dalai Lama to be the head of Tibet. This was due to Gushri Khan, the Mongol chief, who united Tibet by force and then offered it to his teacher, the Dalai Lama, who then became the head of Tibet. And then as a result of that, a lot of monasteries were forcefully converted to Gelug, because there have been quite some, as some of you, if you know about Tibetan history, there'd been a lot of fighting back and forth between Tang in the west and Lhasa in the central Tibet. And they were, generally the Sangpas were united under the Kagyu, and Lhasa was under the Gelug. So there was definitely some kind of tension going on based, both politically and then based on allegiances to different groups. But actually it looks like, that His Holiness, the 5th Dalai Lama, when he was not supporting this conversion. So sometimes I've read other sources that have said, that it looks like he was doing this, but he said quite clearly, this is completely useless. We shouldn't be converting people. It doesn't benefit them, nor does it benefit us. It's much better to have religious diversity into that. So that seems to be a common theme among the Dalai Lamas. His Holiness obviously has emphasized that again and again. And actually, the 5th Dalai Lama as well was a very strong Nyingma practitioner, which was based actually on his teacher from Seraj. Some of you might know Seraj is a bit unique among Gelug monasteries because our Yidam deity, our tutelary deity, is a Nyingma, Haigriva. That's because the founder of Seraj was the son of a Haigriva practitioner, a Nyingma practitioner, and that was the family practice, and he carried that on. And then the fifth Dalai Lama, one of his teachers was Kundun Pelzer Gundrup, who was an abbot of Seraj. And he influenced the fifth Dalai Lama to then practice Nyingma quite strongly. So that's been a common theme also among the Dalai Lamas, to be open to the other religious practices in Tibet. So His Holiness was then saying more and more Buddhists are coming in China, and that to seek independence by compassion, then we have a chance, not by Ngarpo. Ngarpo is a Tibetan word. So I don't know exactly how to translate it, but I remember when I first learned this word, when I was talking to my Tibetan teacher here at Sera, I asked him, what does Ngarpo mean? And he said, well, think of one of those nomads who rides in his horse and doesn't listen to what other people tell him. He's sort of very fierce, independent, and he drinks 7 or 8 cups of butter tea a day. That's what we call Ngarpo. So His Holiness was saying, if you're Ngarpo, that's not going to help us win independence. We have to be compassionate. And he was saying also that the Senri Kundu, some of you might know, these books on science and Buddhist worldview, which are available to, the first 2 of them have been translated now. It's Wisdom Publications. I think there's a Buddhist Classics series or Science and Buddhism. Again, I'll check on that if anyone's interested. There's 7 volumes now in Tibetan, but only 2 in English so far. And yeah, he's saying they've also been translated into Chinese, and a lot of Chinese people are reading these. And if you've read these books, they're very much trying to build bridges between the Nalanda tradition and the modern science. They're not religious books so much as approaches to understanding. The first book was about the physical world, and the second one is about the mind. So His Holiness was saying it should be by reason and not forcing others to convert. So he's saying that in Himalaya, this is your religion, in Himalayan regions. And many Western scholars are also interested in Buddhism and in compassion. This is clearly becoming more and more. And psychologists are interested in the Nalanda tradition. They see it as very profound. It's not about religion, it's about interest in the ancient Indian psychology. And then he shifted, I think, a bit the topic. He was talking about Songtsen Gompo, was the first great religious king in Tibet in the 7th century. I believe he was considered the 42nd king of Tibet. There was a long line before that went back, before the Common Era. But he was the first one to actually invite Buddhism into Tibet. So he brought the Zhou statue, the statue of Buddha from China, because he had a Chinese wife. He had one Chinese wife, one Nepalese wife, who were both Buddhist. And he brought this statue in from China, but he said we also need more than just a statue, we need a language. So actually, this is fairly unique, I think. I don't know about many other cultures who've actually invented a written language in this way, but rather than it happening in a sort of organic way, he simply sent his minister, Todmi Sambodha, to India to learn Sanskrit and then create a written language based on Sanskrit for the Tibetans. So it was one person sort of inventing the language. Of course, the spoken Tibet, the sounds are nothing like Sanskrit, but the grammatical structure is based on Sanskrit. So if we study Tibetan grammar, all of the rules are based on the Sanskrit. And then also he was saying then after Songtsen Gampo, a few generations later, there was Chesong Detsen, one later king, who invited Shantarakshita, who we mentioned earlier, and Shantarakshita said that we should translate the text all the Buddhist texts. So he was saying there's some rumors that Santarakshita himself learned Tibetan script, although it's not substantiated. But in any case, he oversaw this translation project of the Kangyur, which is the Buddhist teachings, the 108 volumes, to Tibetan, and the Tangyur, which is the commentaries by Indian masters, which is 225 volumes. That wasn't all finished then, actually. That was the first dissemination, and then later, of course, a little bit of Tibetan history. Then later, the third Tibetan king, Relpa-Chen, the third Dharma king, was a few generations later than that, and then he was murdered, most likely by his brother, who then took over. But then his brother Langdharma was murdered just 2 years later, and then Tibet entered a dark age for about 100 years, and then later, sort of Buddhism gradually flourished again, and some people started codifying the Kangyur and Tengyur, and finally was finished by Bhutan Rinpoche, who died 5 years after Tsongkhapa was born. So it was just finished just as Tsongkhapa appeared. So it seems Tsongkhapa appeared just in time to take advantage of all of the material that was now available from India, which is quite substantial if you think about it. I don't know how many texts are considered in the Pali Canon, but I expect it's not more than 10 or 15 volumes, although I'm not sure. We have a lot of them here in English now translated. The Vinaya might be a lot more. I'm not sure exactly, but other than the Vinaya texts, it's much less. Whereas in the Tibetan text is an enormous amount, and of course this doesn't just include the as I said, the teachings of Buddha. It's also all of this whole tradition of the Indian masters. And also he was pointing out that it's in Tibet. As I mentioned, the Pali Canon is in Pali, so it's an Indian language. So in Thailand and in Burma and Sri Lanka, they're not actually using the local language when they learn Buddhism. So the ordinary people can't understand it. But in Tibet, everything is in Tibetan. As I said, because the Tibetan language was developed based on Sanskrit, then it was actually very easy to translate into Tibetan because the rules were the same, and they had very standardized vocabulary. So it's almost just like Sanskrit changing clothes. It doesn't really doesn't require, for example, translated to English is a lot harder because English has its own literary tradition and its own way of phraseology that's completely different, and the connotations of words are completely different. But the Tibetan language was invented in order to translate Buddhist texts, so it made it a lot easier to do so. So then he was saying, we start with colors and so forth. So if you learn debate, the first subject is colors and so forth. It's just a way of learning how to understand what is a pervasion and a correct sign. And then you move on later to Lorik, to minds and awareness, and then to Takrik, which is the signs and reasoning. And then to Parchin, Prajna Paramita, the perfection of wisdom, which is studying mainly the stages of the path. This is the most extensive study we do here. So we study that for 7 years, etc. And then the Madhyamaka text, so studying about emptiness. And then the Vinaya texts, and finally the Abhidharma texts, learning about kind of a synthetic, a complete Buddhist worldview, trying to understand everything, how it all fits together. That's an Abhidharma. And then His Holiness came back to the story. So he said, just before Santarakshita died, he invited his student Kamalashila to come to Tibet. So Kamalashila was also one of the great Indian masters. His Holiness often teaches the text, the stages of meditation, which is one of his most important texts. Although also I mentioned the text on valid cognition by Santarakshita, and Kamalashila also wrote a major commentary on that, which is also something part of the Ladakh class we studied here. So then there was the great debate, maybe you know, at Samye Monastery in Tibet. the first monastery, there was, at that point in Tibet, there were different strands of Buddhism. It wasn't just all one. Although there was the king had invited these Indian masters, but there were other masters coming in from China mainly, and so there was a question of who do we follow? Is Tibet going to take as its source the Indian masters or the Chinese masters? And so the king decided to have a debate between Kamalashila and his students, and then against mainly Hashang Mahayana, the Chinese master, and he says the great meditators, whereas Kamalashila were the great logicians. And that in the debate, then the Indians gave all of these great logical reasonings, and then the Chinese monks, and they just meditated. So the king said, thank you very much, goodbye, sent it back to China. And that obviously had an enormous impact on Tibetan history, because then Tibet basically absorbed the Indian tradition, which was gradually dying out in India, but it transferred a great deal of that to Tibet as a result of that. But His Holiness is saying Tibet is based on the valid cognition text, the text on logic and epistemology, because it's based on Shantarakshita and Kamalashila and their lineage, and they were part of that lineage. And His Holiness was saying, and when we debate, we have very hidden phenomena, things that we can't know by reasoning. So it's not, although reasoning is of course considered central, of course there are also some things that we can't know by reasoning. It's just understood that I can't use reasoning to, for example, to predict what the weather is going to be like in 100 years. It might help me to do so. I might be able to use reasoning to get an educated guess, but I could be completely wrong. There's no way to really prove it one way or the other. And likewise in Buddhism, we talked about I use reasoning to establish the workings of karma. We can understand in a general sense how it might work, but to be able to say, if I do this action, then this will be the result. In science, they talk about, if you go back 1 million years and you stamp on a butterfly, will it change the weather in fact in the present time? It's just impossible to know. So it's like that with karma. How can we know that one little action? How can we know what all the different connections that will result from that? So he says, sometimes we give quotations. It's part of debate, of course. Is also to give a quotation from the text and say, what do you say to that? Because that we are saying we have to accept the position. So implicitly, for example, if we're debating about Chandakirti's text, as the defender, I'm trying to defend Chandakirti's position. It's part of the exercise in debate. So if I'm trying to defend that and you say it says this in the text, you as the debater say that to me, I can't just say, oh, I don't accept that, because the point is I'm trying to defend the text. I can't go against what it says. But you can't. What's clear is that I can't just give a quotation from a different text. If we're debating about Chandakirti, and I'm trying to defend Chandakirti's text, then if you give a quotation from Chandarakshita, then I can say I don't accept that, because I'm defending Chandakirti's text here, and Chandakirti doesn't agree with Chandarakshita. But as His Holiness was saying, when they give the quotation, if you might see in debate, if it's a formal debate, they'll have the hat on, the yellow hat. When somebody gives a quotation as a respect for the text, they will remove the hat and put it on their lap and bow their head while they listen to the quotation. But His Holiness was saying, as soon as they finish the quotation, they'll put the hat back on and say, no pervasion, meaning I don't accept, okay, they said that in the text, but I don't agree. Meaning, it doesn't mean, in saying no pervasion to a quotation doesn't necessarily mean you don't agree with the quotation. It means that you have a different interpretation of what it means. So if I say that, well, Chandakirti, so if we're talking about the compassion is important in the beginning, middle, and end, and you say, and I say as the defender, say that the Buddha doesn't have compassion, for example. I mean, that would be one position we could have in debate. The Buddha doesn't have compassion because compassion is a conceptual consciousness, and Buddha doesn't have conceptual consciousness. And then somebody says, well, it follows that the Buddha does have compassion because Chandakirti says compassion is important in the beginning, middle, and end. And I say no pervasion. You said that, but I have a different way of explaining the meaning of what he's saying. When he says compassion is important in the end, he doesn't mean that the Buddha has compassion. He means something else. So that would be one example how we could, somebody can try as their best if they have a particular position in debate to fit that into the tradition. But of course, if we don't accept the text together, then you can't give a quotation. So if I'm a Christian and you're debating with me, you can't give a quotation from a Buddhist text. What you could do is give a quotation from the Bible, because I'm supposed to be a Christian, and so if I'm trying to defend a Christian tradition, you say give a quotation from the Bible, and I say, oh, I don't accept that. Well, then what use is my trying to defend the Christian tradition? I haven't done it so effectively. So before a debate, we all understand what are the perimeters and what is this person claiming to as their authoritative text, and they're trying to defend that. Or somebody might just compose their own text and try to defend that. The point is, whatever they say, this is what I accept, then they have to, if they want to be consistent in their reasoning, then they have to continue to defend that. So His Holiness again was saying from a young age, Tibetans in the monasteries, in the nunneries, they study the 5 texts, which I mentioned before, the 5 texts being pramana, which is the reasoning, and then parchan, the perfection of wisdom, madhyamaka, vinaya, and abhidharma. And he said this is based on the tradition of Chapa Choki Zenge, who was a great master in the 11th century, who was really the founder of the debate tradition in Tibet. So Tsongkhapa thought very highly of his tradition, even though he strongly negated his point of view. Chapa Choki Zenge had the position that emptiness is truly existent. So Tsongkhapa was quite against that particular position, but still was very respectful of the great tradition of logic that had been started by Chapa Choki Zenge, I think at Sangpu Monastery, which was the great study monastery before Tsongkhapa, and even at the time of Tsongkhapa, but gradually, then Sera, Ganda, Drepung, the Gelug monasteries gradually became much larger. So he's saying that in Thailand and Sri Lanka and other Buddhist countries, I think he was saying that they quite admire what is being done in the Tibetan tradition, although I didn't quite hear the point he was saying, but I think that was the idea. That he's often said, it's clear. Somebody mentioned to me once, he attended a dialogue about Vinaya between Tibetan monks and I think Thai monks. And he pointed out that it looked like the Tibetan monks, when they were trying to make a point about the Vinaya, they approached everything to reasoning. Well, it should be this way because the Buddha said this, and to be consistent, you have to say this, and then we can then extend that reasoning to this or that. Whereas the Thai monks were very much just quoting scripture and saying, we have to accept this because it says this and this is that text. So it's a very different approach. But that's clearly the hallmark of the Tibetan tradition is to use reasoning more than scriptural authority. Oh, and then His Holiness said it was very nice. There's more and more foreigners coming to the 3 great seats. So I assume he's talking about Setter J because there actually aren't that many coming to the other ones. But maybe, yeah, of course, if he sees them in the crowd, we're there together. There's definitely, I think, more foreigners now than there was before. It's still slow building up communities here. So at Sarah J, we have about 15, I think 16 maybe, foreign monks, and then Saturday there's 1. Drepung, Ganden there's 2. Drepung, I don't know of any at the moment that I can think of. But then also some of the smaller monasteries and some of the nunneries also have some Western nuns. And the Buddhist Dialectic School also has quite a few foreigners, I believe. Nevertheless, it's an open path. We certainly need more people. So if anyone's interested, please, this is a great place. Not just Sera, I don't mean Sera, but these Indian institutions have, Tibetan institutions in India have extraordinary education programs, something that's not available anywhere else in the world. His Holiness is saying he's very happy to see that. And also that a lot of the people that are trained in these monasteries then go on to teach philosophy in secular schools, especially in the Tibetan schools, but also I think in a lot of Indian schools and of course in Western Dharma centers. So he is pointing out that in exile, even though we've been in exile, that actually the Tibetan tradition, Rikshung, we say, Rikshung is like culture or the literary tradition, is actually getting stronger and increasing, and the whole world is taking interest in it. So His Holiness said, yeah, it's the main point of this practice is not offering serkyam. Serkyam is one of the offerings to the protectors. So the main point is studying the great text, the traditional text, and using the path of reasoning. And he's saying not only monks but also nuns in India. And then His Holiness was recalling when he sat for his Geshe examination in 1959, Monlam Damcha. So this is during the Monlam Chenmo in Lhasa, which is when we say Hlarampa, you might know, Hlarampa Geshe, and different levels of Geshe. So the reason it's called Hlarampa is short for either Hladen or Lhasa Rabjampa. So Rabjampa means a scholar, and Lhasa they did their Damcha, their final examination in Lhasa. That's why it's called Hlarampa. So His Holiness took his final examination in Lhasa during the Monlam Chenmo. That's when they always do it, during the Monlam Chenmo. So he's saying there were only great scholars there at the time, but he felt relaxed. He didn't feel that his mind went blank, but nevertheless his heart was racing. And he said he became an Amdo Geshe, because His Holiness is from Amdo. And he gave a quote from a text, a Dua text, a Vinaya text. So he said, Samdan Lokle, Samdan Lokle Ledaki, Lula Ningbo Lawacha. So yeah, through the actions of meditation and reading, study, then take the essence of this human life. So these are considered the traditional, this is why Vinaya text is the traditional actions of a monk. It said, meditation and study. Nirmik Gunsamgini, Nirmik Gunsamgicho, Nirmik Gunsamgichope, Sampanaya Nichaho. Yeah, so never think that it's sufficient simply to wear saffron robes. Meaning, if you're a monk or a nun, it's not enough just to wear monastic robes. You have to meditate and study. That's the real work of monastics. So he said, if you're a monk, it's good that, or a nun, you should know the Denrosum, the three Pitakas, the three baskets of teachings, meaning the Vinaya, the Sutra text, which mainly explain meditation, and then the Abhidharma text, which mainly explain wisdom and the reality. We just had a point about this last night in our Vinaya debate about somebody being a past Tibetan scholar was saying that it was a question of why is it that a monk, if a monk, if his teacher becomes sick, he should serve his teacher. But the question is, if many of your teachers become sick, who do you help first? And it said the first teacher you should help is your abbot, meaning the person who ordained you. And the last in line is your philosophy teacher. So somebody said there was a question of why, and one of the past Tibetans was saying, well, it's because the philosophy teacher is, relatively speaking, the least kind, because the abbot teaches you about Vinaya, about how to behave, and that's the foundation of your life. Whereas the philosophy teacher only teaches you about the philosophy, which is not as important. But then this was heavily negated by later Tibetans who said that they made it in two ways. One is that it's really the wisdom that brings liberation. So in that sense, it's the most important. The other ones are the foundation of that. And secondly, then they gave the example, well, Atisha came to Tibet. Some of you might know he never gave monastic ordination. They asked him not to, because Atisha was the Mahasamgika lineage, and they didn't want to have two different lineages of monasticism in Tibet, because Tibetan monasticism is based on the Mulasavardhan lineage, which is what Chandrachita would have been. So he never was a Kempo for anybody. He was only a philosophy teacher. So are you saying that Atisha was not very kind? He doesn't actually answer the question, but obviously it's a rhetorical question that anybody in Tibet at that time probably would have had to think twice. And if somebody said that, this was being written in the 12th century, so it would have been just 200 years after Atisha had been to Tibet. So yeah, His Holiness was saying, we're mainly in exile, but there's interest from all over the world. He was talking about receiving the Nobel Prize. So he's saying that many Western scholars have taken interest in him and in his work. So he tries to introduce them slowly to selflessness. And then he's saying so it's important for you today to study and to generate within Ningtop in Tibetan. Ningtop, you say courage perhaps in English. Ningtop literally means force of heart. So I don't know if, I guess in English, probably the closest word would be courage or enthusiasm. So he's saying develop that and be very strong in your aspiration to study. And then His Holiness was talking, now he finally got to the text, the Shantideva's text. So he's saying he received this from Kuno Lambar Bishe, Kuno Tenzin Gyaltsen. So Kuno is Tibetan for Kinor, which is an area in another part of the Tibetan sphere, actually near Ladakh in North India. There's Ladakh and Spiti and Kinor and some other areas there. So this was Kuno Rinpoche was an Indian from that area who actually traveled to Tibet before the Chinese invasion and studied there, and then came back to India and was living very humbly in Varanasi working as a university professor, living in a tiny little apartment in Varanasi. But His Holiness took him as one of his main teachers. He's saying he met him in Bodh Gaya, and immediately could tell that his great practice of bodhicitta, and it was clear from talking to him, that he had really understood bodhicitta. So he asked him for teachings on this text, the Bodhisattva Charyavatara by Shantideva. And then His Holiness was saying, so to benefit self and others, he was quoting the Bodhisattva vows. If you have the ceremony of taking the Bodhisattva vows, there is lighting's not so good right this time with the sun. Let's see. Maybe this is better. He's saying, in order to achieve the purpose of myself and others, then I generate bodhicitta. So he's saying, for compassion is best for oneself, the best for others. It's the best way to accumulate merit and the best way to purify. And then he recited the rest of the Bodhisattva vow, but I won't go through that now. There's not a lot of time. But anyway, if you have the ceremony for the Bodhisattva vows, that's, there's about, I think it's three verses, it's 12 lines. So probably you have the Lama Chupa, what's included in there, in the FPMT Lama Chupa, or otherwise I can try to get it if anyone wants to let me know later. He was saying it for oneself, for the practice of the 6 perfections, for others, the practice, the 4 means of gathering disciples. So if you know in the Lamrim, this is the Bodhisattva practices. After one generating bodhicitta, then he was saying it because in the Bodhisattva vows, it says, for the purpose, having generated the mind of bodhicitta, then I will engage in practices of Bodhisattva. So we're saying this is twofold. The practice of the 6 perfections, which is mainly for one's own purpose of becoming enlightened, and then the practice of gathering disciples, which is to practice giving of what they need in order to to help people. If you practice generosity, then people will be interested in what you have to say, and then to speak pleasantly, and then to act in accordance with what's considered proper behavior in the world, and also to act in accordance with what you say. To practice what you preach, and then finally to engage in the practice of ripening and liberating disciples, and teaching them to do the same. Ripening is giving foundational practices, and liberating means giving them the advanced practices to be able to achieve liberation. So he says, every day I think about bodhicitta, and it moves my mind. And he quoted the last 3 verses of the 6th chapter. So now we can do the screen share. I'll show these verses. That's 3 verses of the 6th chapter. This is Thupten Jinpa's translation of the Entering the Middle Way. So these last 3 verses. So thus illuminated by the rays of wisdom's light, the Bodhisattva sees as clearly as a gooseberry on his open palm, for the 3 realms in their entirety are unborn from the very start. And through the force of conventional truth, he journeys to cessation. So this is understood as saying that the Bodhisattva directly realizes emptiness and sees clearly that as if he was just holding a piece of fruit in his hand, that the three realms, meaning all of existence, is completely unborn, meaning it's empty of inherent existence. Yet through the force of conventional truth, meaning understanding that conventionally things still function, and through compassion, then he journeys to cessation, which is nirvana. And though his mind may rest continually in cessation, he also generates compassion for beings bereft of protection. Advancing further, he will also outshine through his wisdom all those born from the Buddha's speech and the middle Buddhas. So it's saying, although the Bodhisattva rests continually in cessation, meaning perpetually realizing emptiness, out of compassion, then for beings who are without a guide or without protection, then he generates, he sends out emanations to benefit them. So he'll also outshine through his wisdom. So those born from the Buddha's speech is talking about hearers, the Hinayana Arhats, and middle Buddhas is meaning Prateka Buddhas. The other levels of realization that are not as strong as the Bodhisattva or the Buddha. So outshining through wisdom, meaning that through the force of his, it's understood in this, according to Chantakirti, that all of these different practitioners realize emptiness. But the Bodhisattva, the emptiness realization is much more vast in terms of applying that realization to many more, much broader frame of reference, and also through meditative ability, being able to continually shift in meditation. So the other realization beings, when they're in meditation and emptiness, they can't also be benefiting beings, but the unique quality of a Buddha is to be able to do both simultaneously. So this comes through a lot of meditative practice. And like a king of swans soaring ahead of the other accomplished swans. So this is again talking about the Bodhisattva on the 6th Bodhisattva ground. And white wings of conventional ultimate truth spread wide, propelled by the powerful winds of virtue, the Bodhisattva would cruise to the excellent far shore, the oceanic qualities of the conquerors. So this is the end of the 6th chapter of the text. So it's saying that that the Bodhisattva now is sort of on track to achieve Buddhahood quite soon. And when it's saying outshine through wisdom, it's actually understood in Chandakirti's system. This happens at the 7th ground. So it's saying at the end of the 6th ground, then one will achieve that on the 7th ground. See that this is the text, the 7th ground. It's only one verse. but it's talking about enter cessation instantaneously and within a single moment. This is the way that it's understood, that there's the outshining. Anyway, this is a very complex point, but if anyone is interested to look into that, but I won't get into it too much now. But anyway, His Holiness was quoting these last three verses. He seems to do that quite a lot in the last teachings I've been to. And so the point really, we say very concisely, is that one both realizes emptiness, but also through compassion, then is still appearing in the world in order to benefit others. Okay. So, he said, if you meditate on this for years, then you will get confidence. You'll get a sense of feeling that that no one can sort of waver you from your confidence in the truth of this. And saying that if you get calm abiding, you can place that single point on emptiness, and then there's hope for achieving cessation. So it's not just words, but it's important to be diligent and to practice this. So he says, I think of my life, and he thinks of this verse from the Praise for Dependent Origination by Tsongkhapa. So it's that Tsongkhapa is then saying, I ordained following this teacher, the Buddha, inferior in studying the teachings, meaning it's sort of a humble way of saying he studied. And I put, I'm a Gelon, a bhikshu who has put effort into yogic practice. So I therefore, in this way, I pay respect to the great sage, saying that I pay homage to the Buddha based on his teachings, based on what he taught. And so he then says, one gets some kind of, His Holiness was saying he has some kind of similitude of that, perhaps, that he's not quite like Tsongkhapa, but he feels a sense of similarity in terms of having practiced through his life, and then as a result, feeling gratitude to the Buddha for that reason. So he says, he and Tsongkhapa, we are the same Tailchikam, I mean, we're the same country, same place, same area. They're actually very close by. I don't know exactly how close, but Tsongkhapa was born in Amdo, as you might know, in northeast Tibet. So the legend is that when he was born, then where he was born, where some of his mother's blood spilled when he was born, then a tree sprouted, and then this tree, then on the branch, on all the leaves of the tree would have Tibetan lettering and different, especially the Ah symbol, I believe. And actually, what's quite astounding is that this is attested to by some British travelers who came there in 1850, and they wrote that they were astounded. They actually, I think, missionaries. So they did not accept Buddhism, but they were quite amazed by this tree, and maybe a little disturbed by it, but they recorded it quite clearly in their travel log. So this tree is that's why the area is called Kumbum. Kumbum means 100,000 bodies. So it's saying that the tree is I think maybe some of the leaves had bodies of the Buddha also. I don't know. So that as a result of that, the area became called Kumbum, and the monastery there is called Kumbum. So His Holiness was born in Kumbum, that area. So I don't know exactly how close, but it's probably just within a few miles of where Tsongkhapa was born. So he then was saying this text, Bodhisattva Vatara, that Shantideva, he wrote this. He was a Trapatrakyan in Tibet, which means like a simple monk, nothing special. And then he had a kind of inferior view of him because he didn't seem to be doing anything of value. So they invited him to give this discourse, public discourse. Really, it was a way of embarrassing him. They thought if they did that, it would show publicly how inferior he was. So he stepped up onto the teaching throne, and His Holiness was saying he seemed very dignified and confident. He calmly started to recite these verses. So His Holiness was then giving the first couple of verses from the first chapter, and saying that very quickly a lot of the scholars were captivated by what he was saying. And the legend is that when he then reached the 9th chapter, which is what we're going to be talking about this weekend, His Holiness will talk about tomorrow, and we'll talk about more this weekend. At one verse, I'll explain when we get there what verse that is. It said that he ascended into the air as a demonstration of his realization of emptiness, and then disappeared into the sky. And it said that the rest of the recitation just came from the space, and then nobody knew where he went. They eventually located him somewhere in the forest, and pleaded with him to please come back and teach in a monastery. But he said, I don't know if he said it this way, but sort of, you lost your chance. I was there all those years. Nobody ever asked me. But the point was that he decided he was going to live as a hermit the rest of his life. But he did have, some of them came and became his students. And my classmate told me, I don't know, I've never heard this, but apparently they went to his room afterwards, and they found the text that that Bodhisattva Charyavatara was hidden in the ceiling, in the rafters in the ceiling or something. So that's how they actually got the text. But I don't know if that's the case. I thought it was just that they recorded it and wrote it. I'd heard that was the case because they say that's why there's different recensions of the text. Different people wrote it slightly differently based on what they heard. I'm not sure. But, in any case, so then His Holiness, then he actually went to the first chapter today, which was surprising. He was going to be teaching on the 9th chapter, but I think the idea was that he felt this was probably most beneficial for a general audience because most people there were not great scholars, and the 9th chapter is the most difficult by far. The first chapter is the most accessible, just about the benefits of bodhicitta. I don't need to go through every verse in the first chapter. You don't have time. You can certainly read it yourself, but I will share it and then mention that His Holiness. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, here we are. So yeah, I will mention if His Holiness said things about some specific verses. Yeah, so I think most of it, he mentioned this 5th verse being just an example, the 4th verse saying that leisure endowments are hard to find, the student body is hard to find, not like a flash of lightning on a dark, cloudy night. So he was giving that example. And then for verse 7, he was just saying, all Buddhas who have contemplated for many aeons have seen it to be beneficial, it being bodhicitta. For by it, the limitless masses of beings will attain the supreme state of bliss. So he was saying that the 3 times Buddhas, past, present, and future Buddhas, they all come from bodhicitta. That's what gives rise to Buddha. That's the cause of Buddhas. And then verse 10, it is the supreme gold-making elixir, for it transforms the unclean body we have taken into the priceless jewel of a Buddha form. Therefore, firmly see this awakening mind. So he was saying, this body we have taken, it comes about through karma and afflictions. That's what's meant by unclean in the sense. It's under the other power of karma and affliction. We don't take birth by choice, but by habituation with karma and affliction in previous lives. But he's saying we can then use this birth to realize emptiness and then stop the continuum of that rebirth. So that is how that comes from bodhicitta. So this gold is like an example of a gold-making elixir that transforms, transforms something that's not gold into gold. Likewise, this bodhicitta transforms this body, which is impure, into the priceless jewel of a Buddha form. Oh, I think it froze. Hello. I'm sorry. I'm not sure what happened just there, but something froze here. I don't know if we lost the internet or if the computer froze, but sorry about that. So I left off just saying this, that this verse about the Buddha form, that this holding the transforming the body into the through bodhicitta transforms the body into the body of Buddha. I'm not sure exactly when it got cut off. And then, yeah, I can't share the screen right away. It doesn't not allow me. But in verse 22, I have, which is talking about the, if you would just have the wish that all beings be free of a headache, then what immeasurable benefit that would have compared to the wish that all beings were free of all suffering forever, then unbelievable benefit. So it is just, as Holiness was saying, that we can make this life incredibly meaningful, even though it comes through karma and afflictions. And then we just read through the end of the chapter and was saying for tomorrow we'll do chapter 9. So we only have about 10 minutes left. I do have to leave at 5:30 because the disciplinarian won't be happy if I'm late for the puja. But if anybody has any questions, please let me know. You can either write them on the screen, on the chat, or speak them. Okay. Can you please expand on how compassion gives you energy to understand emptiness versus someone who is just interested in emptiness? Yeah, that's a very good point. So, okay. Yeah, first of all, actually, I should mention I wasn't very specific because I didn't want to complicate it, but to be very specific, in Chandikirti system, you do not need it and compassion to realize emptiness, because, for example, the hearers, the non-bodhisattva practitioners, they also realize emptiness. What is necessary is, it said, to realize emptiness through what's called countless forms of reasoning. So what this means is that I mentioned it about the outshining, how the bodhisattvas outshine the non-bodhisattva practitioners, is that their realization of emptiness is much broader. So it's applying this understanding to many, many different points of view. So not just understanding emptiness, so I meditate on the emptiness of my body or my mind, and that's enough, and then through that I just stay with that realization. But then applying that to many, many different forms of reasoning, which is the justification for why we study so much in this tradition. It has to do with bodhisattva practice, that in order to really expand one's mind and become a Buddha, it requires more than just the realization of emptiness. It requires applying that to all different, all different fields of learning, and being able to use that realization of emptiness to be able to understand many other things. So this is when the best example that's considered to be of this is Nagarjuna's text, the Root Wisdom, which is 27 chapters, and it applies emptiness to many, many different examples. So it doesn't just say, it starts with the first chapter being about conditions, so that a sprout and a seed, but it just stopped with that. And then it goes into the second chapter about coming and going. And then the third chapter about the sense powers, and the fourth chapter about the aggregates. So it's all the different things that we can imagine in the world, and then understanding how they're empty. So if you read Chandrakirti's text, the entering the middle way, which is understood to be like entering in the sense of trying to help us to get a foothold to enter into Nagarjuna's text, he only focuses really on two of those points, but he gives them much more detail on them. Mainly the first chapter and the 18th chapter. Those are the main ones that are actually being commented on in Chandrakirti's text. But in Nagarjuna, he's applying this to all these different things. So that's understood. That's, of course, based on the Perfection of Wisdom sutras, which go through all of these different things. The Heart Sutra being the most condensed. But when the Heart Sutra says no form, no feeling, no mind, and so forth, if you read the much more extensive sutras, like the 8,000 verses, then it says it goes through many more bases and emptiness. So this is how a bodhisattva is meant to practice. But it said that in order to do that, it requires compassion, because if you don't need that to achieve liberation. It's not necessary to have all these different forms of reasoning. It's enough just to have a realization of emptiness and focus on that. So if nobody is, the only thing that's going to cause somebody to do that is compassion. If somebody doesn't have the intention, isn't concerned about liberating others, then there's no reason to put all the effort into doing that, because it requires a lot more effort. And it actually delays one's realization. It takes a lot longer, because one has to gather sort of a lot more conducive conditions before actually being able to have deep realization, which is again part of the justification for studying for so long in the monastery. I hope that's properly justified. I'll have to find out, let you know in the future. But this is the justification. Well, why do you spend 26 years studying before you meditate? It's that, yes, it at first you don't have realizations to the level of somebody who just meditates for that many years, but when you do meditate, the realization will be much deeper, because you build a much broader base. And then on top of it, of course, with tantric practice, understood, there's even something even deeper. It's an even more extensive way of applying this realization of emptiness. So the motivation to do that, the strong motivating force, has to be compassion. Without that, somebody, why would I, if I don't really have this strong sense if I'm going to liberate others, no point in doing all of that. Why don't I just quickly meditate and get out of samsara? It's like if I want to escape from prison, if there's just the door is open, I can just walk out the door. But if I want all my other friends in prison to get out with me, then I have to make a much deeper plan. And the motivating force for that has to be some kind of altruism. Otherwise, I just walk out the door. Okay, can you please say more about how affection is the same as compassion? Well, actually, so affection, of course, these are English terms, right? But in this context, Chandrakirti is using sewa to mean compassion. It just has to do with, part of it is that in Indian texts, they were often not as precise. The Tibetans developed a much more precise language, that when we say this, we mean this and only this. And we define it this way. Whereas the Indian text, they're more, it seems almost more like they're using, trying to use evocative language, but it's not as standardized. So like in colloquial in Tibetan, sewa can mean a lot of things. Sewa is often just affection, like a mother has affection for the son. So they can actually be confusing, because when I first came to the monastery, I remember saying to some of the geshes, well, animals have compassion too, because the mother has compassion for her son. They kind of laughed at me. It's like, that's not what we mean by compassion. We say ningje in Tibetan. Lingje, the word ningje in Tibetan means Lord of the heart. That actually would be karuna. Their name in Sanskrit is ningje in Tibetan. And that's what compassion is understood is not just a sense of closeness or affection that a mother feels for the child. It's sense of, it's the sense of expansiveness, a sense of including all beings in one's outlook. So if someone wants to use affection as a way of kind of being more evocative, to make it, because affection maybe for us has a particular sense that when we hear affection, we think of a mother and we feel a sense of closeness. But it's not necessary. It's, technically affection is one thing, but again, in the text, often it's because also we talked about in Tibetan, we say the Kimse Nu Sum, which are the 3 qualities of the Buddha, which is knowledge, sewa, again, affection, which means compassion in that case. So yeah, it's actually a bit ambiguous. I guess we could say in that sometimes we say this in Tibetan, that there's the specific sense of the term. In that case, affection is synonymous with compassion. And then in the broad sense, in the colloquial sense, it means something maybe much, not quite as specific. But of course, with language, we have to, I think it's useful, even if you don't study Tibetan, at least for these important terms, to know what is really being said in Tibetan. Because of course, in compassion, in English, I think passion comes from Greek, as far as I understand. So calm is meaning with. I think passion has to do with like emotion. So it's feeling emotion with somebody else. So it's a sort of empathy is a similar idea. So it's a completely different term from ningje in Tibetan. And I think karuna, I'd say it's translated into Tibetan as ningje, but I don't think it has the meaning. Ningje literally means ning is heart and jay is Lord. So heart Lord. I don't think karuna has that same etymology. So we can look at what the people were using it for. But ultimately, the important thing is to see how do they define it? What are they trying to say it means? And not get too caught up in how the word sounds to us. Okay, if there's one more brief question, otherwise it's probably good we can stop until tomorrow. Yeah, okay. Well, I think, yeah, that's good. We can stop here for now. And then tomorrow, meet again at 4. So hopefully, His Holiness has said he'll teach quite a bit on the 9th chapter tomorrow, but certainly he won't be able to go into a lot of depth in an hour and a half, that is what he'll have. So we'll just go over, whatever points he makes, and then this weekend, as I said, we can go through it verse by verse. I've been preparing a presentation. I didn't have a lot of time, unfortunately. I only had 1 week to prepare. So I thought of all the things I could do, the most important for me anyway, whenever I give a teaching of a text in verse, I like to have it in English verse. So I've been putting the 9th chapter into English verse. And then if there's extra time, I'll put some pictures in there. But I don't know if there's going to be extra time the next couple of days. Anyway, so thank you. Hope to see you all tomorrow at 4 o'clock Indian time.
Thank you so much, Venerable Gachila, and I'm so sorry for the difficulties in the beginning. I do better tomorrow.
No problem. No problem.
Thank you so much, and good luck for your debate, and thank you so much for making time in your very, very busy schedule. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we see each other. Birgit, maybe keep your question for tomorrow. Is that okay? I can see your hand up. Yeah.
Yeah, please. Yeah, sorry about that. Maybe I had the hand up before. I didn't notice that. But please just keep it for tomorrow. You can ask me at the beginning of the session tomorrow. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 o'clock again. Thank you so much. Have a good evening, or wherever you are. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.